Hello, and thank you for joining us for this week's interview. I'm Helen Henley, Health Optimization Coach, and I'm here with Elwyn Robinson, founder of Lionheart Herbs, creator of Complete Detox Academy, High Energy Academy, author of Easy Exhausting Cure. I could go on. Hello, Elwyn.
Hi, Helen. Hi, everyone.
Hello. So today our aim is to provide you with some real value, some inspiration and tools to help you to optimize your life. And I'd like to thank you all for the amazing feedback and comments that we had on last week's call. We really, really appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
So today's topic is about why we so often self-sabotage our efforts to get healthy and improve our life. So this call is for you if you find yourself committing to a healthy diet only to find yourself reaching for the chocolate bar or the chips, even though you know you really don't want to. And this call is for you if you decide to exercise only to find yourself sat in front of the TV and feeling guilty. There's so many of these self-sabotage scenarios. You know, why do we do it? So my first question is, what's going on, Elwyn? It's like we have two competing voices in our head. It sounds sort of crazy. Do you have an explanation for this?
The main point of our call today is we're going to go for the psychological aspect, like you said, the different voices in our head. But just before we get into that, I'll just mention that there are a few different reasons why we sabotage ourselves. In one case, it could actually be related to some kind of organisms inside us. And of course, we went over this in the interview that we did last week when we talked about the gut health and digestion and the microbiome. But sometimes self-sabotage is through an impulse or a voice which is not our own, which is where the ancient idea came from, a possession, or like possession by an evil spirit or something like that. Because it kind of feels like we're being taken over by some outside force. Now, sometimes this could be an aspect of our own brain and our own personality, and we'll discuss that very soon. But just, to mention that it could also be something which is genuinely not us. It could be some kind of organism inside us. And of course, if you're like, what on earth are you talking about, Elwyn? That's sort of bizarre. Then I would refer you to the interview that we did last week. Another thing I'll just mention, another possibility, is that actually we're not sabotaging ourselves. Now, I know that sounds like weird, but let me just explain that for a second. So, for instance, just as an example, I've noticed some people who try and follow a very kind of strict puritanical diet that involves not eating any salt. And then after a while, they kind of go crazy and they binge on something containing salt, usually something that's not healthy, like some chips or crisps or bacon or whatever, something that's high in salt, but also which is not very good for them. Now, in this case, we could say that it's self-sabotage, but we could also say, very truthfully, potentially, that person was severely sodium depleted, that sodium is a nutrient which is absolutely essential for life, and that maybe, that person's body, even though it may not have made the best choice eating the chips or crisps, it was still better than becoming more sodium depleted. So we also just need to acknowledge that reality, the possibility that it's not self-sabotage, it's just you are not giving your body what it needs, and it is reaching out for what it needs in perhaps not the best possible way, but still better than what you were doing when you were all in your head and not listening to your body. So that's another option.
So it could be a mineral deficiency as well, or as we discussed last week, it could be an unbalanced microbiome, gut health.
Yeah, and not just mineral deficiency. I mean, another thing I notice, people who are on diets which are like where almost all their calories are coming from fat, and that works for some people. It can be a good idea for some situations, but a lot of people's bodies are geared and designed to burn on carbohydrate, right? Sugar, and certainly science is quite clear that our brain is fueled by sugar, and not everyone is able to convert fat into sugar that well. And so again, you might find yourself, eating cake or donuts or something like that, and what did I do? I spent the whole month having this alkaline diet where I wasn't having any carbs and suddenly I was just binging it. And again, it can seem like self-sabotage, but maybe it's just your brain going, I need carbohydrate, So we also want to be aware of that possibility. So yeah, those are like the two things that we want to just check off and make sure that it actually is self-sabotage, right? Because maybe it's something else sabotaging you, and maybe it's actually your body taking what it needs. So, let's just, before we get into sabotage, be really, really clear on that.
Yeah, that's so important. So, assuming that you've got those things covered, what else could it be?
So, the next thing, and this is like a really big topic that I'm going to do my very best to, squeeze into one of these short interviews, is this understanding that the idea of us having one singular self is really an illusion. It's not real. It's not true. And so we think of I, as a single thing, but actually I is generally like a plural. And so what do I mean by that? Well, this is something that's backed up very conclusively by science, right? And so we heard the left brain, right brain model. This has been largely kind of discounted these days, although it's a good kind of metaphor to understand certain aspects of ourselves. But the one that's gaining a lot more popularity these days is the free brain model. And so that's the one that says that, you've got the reptile brain near the back of your head, and then you've got the mammalian brain near the center of your head, and then you've got the more human brain at the front of your head. And there's also kind of slightly different version of that, which points out that at the front you've kind of got the human brain right at the very front, the prefrontal cortex, but you've also got the chimp kind of part of your brain, which is behind that, which is in the frontal cortex. Anyway, the point is that all these parts of our self and all these parts of our brain, they have radically different perception, radically different priorities, radically different wants, different needs, different ways of thinking, different modes of cognition, different ways of experiencing the world. And so we've got these different conflicting urges, inclinations, wants, desires, needs, etc. inside us. And we get into some real issues when we try and lump it all together. Because I've heard people say some crazy stuff, and if you really, obviously I've done it too, if you really just stop and listen for a minute, you realise how crazy it is. For instance, I had to stop myself from eating this thing that I really wanted, because if I ate it, I would know afterwards that I would feel really bad. Now, we're using the word I there every time, right, or myself, as if we're talking about one singular thing, but it kind of doesn't make any sense. Like, if there's only one self, then why is it fighting with itself? Why are you battling yourself? Why do you both want to eat the chips and not want to eat the chips at the same time? It seems kind of crazy, right? So it's not a very helpful way of looking at the world, and it's certainly not very accurate. And so, what I would encourage everyone to do is to realize that you have these different parts of yourself. And one model that's becoming very popular these days, which I really like as well, which I adopted a couple of years ago, and which I kind of first came across almost a decade ago, I think, is this idea of, okay, you've basically got two selves within you, just for sake of simplicity, right? You've got the human self, which kind of also relates, if you're familiar with psychological speak, to the adult part of yourself, the adult part of your personality. And then you've got the chimp self, right? And this relates more to the animal part or the child's part of your personality, of your psyche. And so if we were to take that statement apart that I just made, in fact, I don't remember it word for word, but, we could say, okay, so my chimp self really wanted the instant gratification of eating those chips. But my human self, my adult self, knew that if I eat them, I'm probably going to keep eating them because they're full of MSG, and then I'm going to feel really rotten later. So the human part of me had to restrain the chimp part of me and try and get it to stop eating the chips, or to not start eating the chips, right? And now, if we say things that way, you can see almost when I started saying it that way, we almost couldn't get into the idea of fighting yourself or self-sabotage, because it would seem so silly, right? I mean, if you realize it's just a different aspect of yourself that needs help and that needs guidance. I mean, literally, like if you have a pet that has the tendency to, just keep eating like until it bursts, like fish do, maybe. Or if you had a child who, didn't know any better and just had a huge jar full of cookies in front of it and just kind of kept eating and eating and eating until, it was thoroughly sick. I would hope that, your response wouldn't be to go along and start beating it and hitting it and fighting it. And yet that is exactly what we do to ourselves all the time, right? We're beating ourselves up and we're fighting ourselves and we're insulting ourselves in our own head and all the rest of it. And we're not understanding that the simple reality is that we've got these different parts of ourselves, And
I read
that
something, Elwyn. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, and that one part of us just isn't able to think in a very mature, responsible, adult way. It's not able to see long-term consequences. It's not able to think long-term very easily. And so we have to address that part exists and then deal with it.
Yeah, I read, Elwyn, as well, that part of the brain, the reptilian, the chimp brain, is actually, because it's so instinctual, it's actually 10 or 20 times stronger than the adult human part of the brain. So it's almost like a child having a tantrum, and you don't stop a child having a tantrum by shouting at it or bullying it. You have to help it to see what's going on, which totally backs up what you're saying.
Yes, for lots of very important reasons, and one that you just brought up there, Helen, which is absolutely correct, which is that it's kind of like you having a child, but it's a bit more like you being the adult who's like a foot tall, and then the child being like 10 foot tall, in the sense that the child is a hell of a lot stronger and a hell of a lot more powerful. Because if we talk about that adult-child thing, you could say, well, I could always just restrain the child from eating any more cookies, right? I could pick them up and move them into a different room or something like that. But the unfortunate, well, at least until you learn how to deal with it, truth is that, as you say, Helen, the animal part of our brain, the chimp part of our brain, the mammalian and reptilian part of our brain is a lot stronger. And that as a default, we have a lot more. And this is a really important point. So anyone who's kind of been half listening and half paying attention to this interview from now on, this is the time to really pay attention, because this is a crucial understanding for the whole quality of your life. Okay? And I know that's a big statement, but so pay attention, all right? The truth is that there are a lot more controlling links from the middle and the back of the brain to the front than there are controlling links from the front of the brain to the middle and the back. And so what does that mean? That has sort of huge, far-reaching consequences, but on a very simple level, what it means is this. The chimp part, the child part, the animal part, whatever we want to call it, is in charge most of the time, right? And it's very difficult for the adult part, even if we realize, even if we're like, most people don't realize, they're just kind of shoveling chips in their mouth and it never occurs to them, but if you listen to this interview, I'm sure that the adult and, the human part of your brain is quite awake and quite active, and so you get it. You're like, okay, so just, eating whatever I feel like, whenever I feel like, that's probably not serving me. But just realizing isn't enough, because we don't have anywhere near as many controlling connections from the human part back to the animal part as we do the other way around. And this is why most of us, the default for a human being is that we have, is that basically the kind of, even though we hate to admit it, and this is true for all of us, by the way, I'm not, it's not like it's more true for you than me or anything like that. It's true for all of us, is that as a default, as a natural setting, we have way more, most of the time, the animal or the mammalian and reptilian part of our brain is running the show. It's making the actual decisions as to what we do. And the front of the brain, the human part, the adult part, the responsible part, the self-aware part, is really just commenting. And sometimes it's commenting like, oh, that was good, aren't I clever? Or sometimes it's commenting like, oh, no, I'm such an idiot, and beating yourself up. But it's just commenting. It's not having that big of an impact on the actual actions that you take and the actual decisions that you make. And so the good news about that is that you can stop beating yourself up. Right? And just realize, okay, this is the way that we're all born. No, there's nothing wrong with you. There's nothing wrong with me. There's nothing wrong with the world. This is just the way it is. This is how we are wired. And of course, the good news is that we can do a bit of rewiring.
Yeah, so that was what I was going to ask you. Can we get this chimp or reptilian brain, can we get it on our side? Can we get it to work in harmony with us?
Absolutely, yes. Now, because we're talking about basically kind of growing new neuronal connections in the brain, the bad news first, everyone likes the bad news more than the good news. And again, that's because the chimp tends to be in charge, and the chimp is always on the watch for bad news. So the bad news is that it takes time. Okay? So there's no magic switch, there is no, pill, there is no herb. I wish there were. If there were, I'm sure I'd, be a millionaire by now, but there's no anything like that. There is no simple one-shot thing that's going to grow these neuronal connections. Now, the good news is that they can grow at all. And of course, this is something that those who've been into this kind of thing have known about for thousands and thousands of years. And there are all kinds of, traditions in all cultures, including our own, not just in the East, which have sought to do this, to grow those brain connections, which kind of stop the chimp part of us being in control. So yes, there is a huge tradition of it. Yes, science has recently verified that actually it is possible to grow new brain connections. We used to think it wasn't, certainly past childhood, but it is. But it takes time and it takes work.
So how would you go about that on a very basic level?
Great question. So there are a lot of different things which are really good for that. How about I give you 3? Would that be a good starting place?
3 sounds fantastic.
Okay, excellent. So I'll deal with each of them just briefly, but if you want more kind of explanation on each, then let me know. So one that's really good and one that everyone who knows my work knows I'm a champion of is breathing exercises. And there's a million different benefits to becoming aware of your breathing and changing your breathing. And I'm not going to even, get to 10% of them here, and I suggest you kind of refer to my other work to know all the many benefits. But there's one benefit that's particularly relevant to what we're talking about here, and it's this. Breathing is one of the few things that is both in the domain, so that your chimp brain and your autonomic, kind of the automatic part of you is in charge of, and yet which the conscious part of you can become in charge of, right? So that's not true of most things. Most things are either conscious or they're not, So, for instance, like your heart beating, your lymph moving through your system, right? These are things that it's very hard to, consciously control. I mean, we can do things to, raise our heart rate, for instance, but we can't just sit there and will it to become, different or to stop or whatever, right? But we can do that with our breathing. We can stop our breathing at will. We're using our conscious human prefrontal cortex, right? And so whenever we become aware of our breathing, we are exercising particularly the center of the prefrontal cortex, which is to do with presence and awareness. And whenever we are taking control of our breathing and changing our breathing, we are exercising, I believe if memory serves correctly, it was a few years ago I studied this, the left prefrontal cortex, or the left part of our prefrontal cortex, which relates to the ability to make decisions, to be proactive, to be kind of in charge of your life consciously, right? So and of course, once you change your breathing, there's all kinds of benefits to that. But just to emphasize, the act of taking an unconscious action that's totally under the grip of your animal part, your chimp, and becoming conscious of it is really, really, really powerful. Now, just to emphasize for a second, it's also why most people, or one of the main reasons why most people find it very difficult, It's one of the things that people experience a lot of resistance to. And that's for a few different reasons. It could be also because of tightness and tension in the diaphragm. But one of the reasons is because it's hard work. It's hard work for the conscious mind to take control, for the human, the animal part of ourselves to take control of something like that. And by the way, it's not like we should be in control all the time. That's one of the biggest kind of fallacies in the modern world as well. We should 24/7 be totally in control of, anything. We want to be able to let our unconscious, our animal, our mammalian / reptilian sides be in charge most of the time, but we want to be able to make conscious adjustments as necessary. So for instance, if we're in a situation where there is absolutely no need and no benefit from being in a state of panic or fear, but we are anyway, and we realize that we've held our breath and we're not breathing, basically. It's really useful for the adult human conscious mind to step in, go, okay, we can breathe again, take a few deep breaths, calm down, calm the chimp brain down, calm the reptilian fight or flight kind of response down, and then hand it back over to the unconscious part of ourselves. That's really, really beneficial. And so to practice that and to realize it's not necessarily going to be easy, like for those of you who do weight training or who do, I don't know, like running or whatever, that it's not, or who exercise your brain, maybe you study, maybe you work hard to get a degree or something like that, that it's not necessarily easy, but it's worth it to exercise that part of you, right? So to exercise the human part, and what that does very, very slowly and gradually, and it does take years, but what that does is it starts creating more connecting, controlling neuronal pathways between the front of the brain and the back of the brain.
So that reptilian brain is very sort of strong and powerful. So I guess it's a great servant, but it's not a very good master. So we can use it to help us. I know martial artists and the army, they use the sort of connection to the reptilian brain to sort of optimize what they're wanting to do. And I guess we can do that as well through the methods that you're saying. It's just that we want our human brain to be directing it, guiding it. Is that right?
Absolutely. And I mean, martial arts wasn't going to be one of the 3 things I recommended, but it's another example of growing those connections. Because again, like if you're in a situation where you're against an opponent who probably wants to hurt you, the natural thing is fight, flight, or freeze, right? So either you kind of freeze up, in which case you're kind of useless, or you run away, or you start hitting. Now, really, in combat situations, often none of those are a particularly good idea, right? The best thing is to stay very present, very focused, and not hit someone who may then be able to, like generally the person who throws the first strike is, not in a favorable position, right? So that's just another kind of example of it, because as you say, it's about training that reptilian part of the brain to not just react blindly, but to really kind of be aware and respond and act appropriately. So yeah, it's another great example of it. So shall I go to number 2, Helen?
Yes, go for number 2, Owen. I'm fascinated.
So number 2, again, I know you're familiar with, Helen, and this is meditation, right? And so meditation is one of those things that, like, everyone says, yeah, that's a good idea. I don't know how many people who say it's a good idea actually do it. I suspect, based on kind of feedback I've got, it's probably not many, not most of the time. And again, there's a good reason for that. It's because it's difficult, right? And so when I say meditation, just to clarify, there are many, many different forms of meditation. The kind of meditation I'm talking about is really where you take your awareness away from the kind of chattering, monkey chatter. Funnily enough, for a lot of ancient cultures, both in Hindu mythology and Egyptian mythology, they describe the constant chatter of the mind as like a monkey or like a chimp. So to take away our focus from that and to bring our focus back into the present moment, maybe bring our focus back into the body, back into our breathing. That's the form of meditation that I'm talking about. And so that's a really, really powerful practice, again, to grow those same neuronal connections. It also has all kinds of benefits. This is like massively scientifically researched and validated, again, fairly recently in the last few decades and especially the last few years, just how conclusively beneficial meditation is. There's absolutely no doubt about it. Like in the health world, it seems like whatever you say, there's always a big group of people who disagrees with it. That's true for almost everything, but it's not true for meditation. It's one of the few things that, no one's gone, oh, actually, it's not good for you. So, it's one of the things that's it's always a good idea. And yet most people don't do it. And again, I'm not making anyone wrong for that. Again, the reason is because it's difficult. And this is why I encourage people to see meditation, again, like running hard or like weight training or something like that, and realize it is difficult. It is exertion. It's pushing your brain rather than your body, but it's the same kind of principle. And so treat it with respect, realize it is something that's going to be difficult, realize that just like with weight training, if you haven't lifted anything, if you barely even lifted a shopping bag off the ground in many years, you're probably not going to be able to lift 100 kilo weight off the ground, so you kind of start simply and start very easily and develop slowly and gradually. So like if you've never meditated before, if you tried it a couple of times and you found it really difficult and really, boring and you didn't continue with it, then maybe start off just doing like a minute, right? And you can even set a timer to go off after 60 seconds and then go, okay, I'm done, So like rather than trying to do half an hour from not doing, rather than trying to do half an hour from like not doing anything, just increase kind of gradually. And again, generally doing small amounts regularly, like with most things, is a lot better than doing or trying to do a large amount occasionally. So yeah, that would be recommendation number 2. Again, for having the human part start to become more in control.
Okay, so what's number 3 then, Elwyn?
And number 3 is like totally on a different tack probably for most people. And this is something more from the success and personal development and even business sphere and productivity, and that's goal setting. And again, goal setting is something that if your human mind is not in charge, you are, and again, the default is for it not to be in charge, that you're going to struggle with, right? The natural kind of chimp, reptilian, mammal orientation is to react to things as they happen once they happen. And the natural tendency is to avoid pain and discomfort and bad things rather than to try and gain good things that we want. The natural tendency is to deal with what's urgent rather than dealing with what's important. So these are all natural tendencies in terms of kind of how we're pre-wired. And yet, if we want the best possible quality of life, and specifically if we really want health and success in the modern age, which is geared more towards the human rather than towards the animal part of us, then we need to, learn to overcome and move beyond that kind of pre-programmed chimp modality of reacting and thinking short term and stuff like that. And so a great way of doing that is goal setting, right? And so what kind of goal setting? I'll leave it up to you. There's like 1,000,001 different personal development people, and they kind of all teach the same thing, or something similar anyway. But the point is that rather than just reacting to things as they happen, or rather than just having a to-do list, I guess at best, to really think, long term. And long term for you might be a week, might be a month, might be a year, might be 10 years, might be generations, Like in some cultures they think, what do I want my great-grandchildren? What do I have to do now, today, for my great-grandchildren to, not have to be worried about poverty, for instance, right? That's a very long-term perspective. But whatever it is for you, to think as long-term as you can and create goals about. And by the way, don't, try and do generations if that's like totally bizarre to you and you're normally just looking to survive from week to week, right? Again, build up gradually. If you're used to surviving week to week, then maybe set monthly goals, right? If you're used to surviving month to month, maybe set yearly goals, something like that. But yeah, start to think more long-term. Like, what do I want to achieve in my life? And then, from that, create goals, maybe 3-month goal, 6-month goal, 1-year goal. What do I want to have by 2016, January 1st, 2016, that kind of thing. And then actually look at those every day and work towards them, all right? And maybe out of those big goals, you create daily goals or weekly goals or monthly goals. Again, I'll leave it up to you. There's not really a right or wrong way of doing this. Whatever goal-setting system works for you. But here's the thing to understand. Again, I've done this with a lot of people now, and I've noticed again and again that goal-setting is not something that comes naturally. It's something that we have a lot of resistance to. It's something that feels difficult. It's something, again, that feels like lifting a heavy weight, only with our brain. And the reason is because it's a strain on the prefrontal cortex, and because it's not the natural chimp way of looking at life and dealing with life. And so if we do that, if we periodically, every week, every month, every year even, although every year is not nearly as good, set goals, and then if we, on a regular basis, really should be daily, check our goals, track our goals, So if I set a goal like, okay, by January 1st, 2016, I want to be totally healthy. And, and I'll be able to tell because, and, you need to be specific about this, I'll be able to tell because I'll have clear skin and I'll have enough energy to do whatever I want to do. And I won't be ill once. And I will, whatever, I'm drawing a blank at the moment. But, you have a list of things that you want, right? And then every day you're checking that goal and going, okay. And so on my list of things to do for today, or on my list of goals to achieve today, hopefully, am I moving towards that? Right? And a lot of the time you'll realize actually no. What you're doing is making yourself more stressed or more ill, or you're ignoring your body, you're ignoring your body's needs. You're not taking time to relax. You're not taking time to cleanse. You're not taking time to rejuvenate and recuperate. And so that's the kind of normal way. And so if you're really focused on goals, especially long-term goals, and you are incorporating them into your daily life, into what you actually do, I mean, again, it will have all kinds of benefits for you, but also what it will do is it will grow these neuronal connections. So it will exercise and increase the strength and capacity of the prefrontal cortex, the human part of you, and it will increase the control that prefrontal cortex has over the more animal parts of you.
So is there a way, Owen, so if your chimp absolutely creates a hullabaloo and has a tantrum and doesn't want to play ball with you, is there a way that you can set these goals while you're looking after the chimp's needs as well, to get the chimp on side? Is that important to achieving these goals?
Yeah, great question. And yeah, it is. Absolutely. And so I've used words like controlling here, and that's only because that's kind of like the scientific terminology for this kind of these brain connections. But the truth is, it's got to be a relationship between the human part and the chimp part. And so one of the biggest mistakes that we make when we are a little bit more developed in the human part of ourselves is to treat our chimp like crap, to be honest. To treat our body like crap. People who talk about their body as if it's just some tool to be used, or they push themselves really, really hard, and then if they collapse, they're like, body, so, useless. And it's totally out of touch with our animal part of ourselves, totally out of touch with the body. We absolutely don't want that. So what we want is to really treat the animal part of ourselves, which relates more to, the area of the body below the neck, right? The rest of us, not just our head. Really treat the animal part of ourselves, really treat the chimp part of ourselves with an immense amount of respect, an immense amount of caring, an immense amount of nurturing, an immense amount of support. And so when I say do something like breathing practice or meditation or goal setting in order to not have the chimp run the show, it's only because, as you said, Helen, a household where a 2-year-old is running the show is probably not going to be a happy household, right?
Nope.
And yet, on the other hand, if we're faced with that situation, if we wake up one day and we go, oh my God, I'm in a house where a 2-year-old is running the show, we don't want to then start trying to, beat it or control it or make it wrong or anything, because it's a 2-year-old and we love it. And in this case, it's even more strong than that because, a lot of people say your child feels as if it's a part of you, right? Because it's maybe come from your own loins, your own body. But this is it, in terms of your inner chimp, in terms of your inner, that animal part of yourself, it's even more a part of you. It literally is you, right? And so there's absolutely no benefit in treating it badly. And this is also really true for, and this kind of relates back to your original question, Helen, for what it wants, what it needs, what it prioritizes, all the rest of it, right? And so if your chimp is upset because it's no, I don't want to sit here and meditate, it's really boring, then, instead of shut up, chimp, beating it, how dare you, don't interrupt me, we want to be okay, well, what would you like to do, right? And chimp's I'd like something really stimulating, exciting, going on Facebook, I don't know, or, going out and playing a game of Frisbee, or, I don't know, whatever, right? Whatever comes to it that's kind of relevant to you in your life. And then we'll do that, we'll do that in a bit. And so that's really important as well. It's not about suppressing and beating down and making the chimp or animal part of us submit. It's about making you both happy, but restoring the situation where the 2-year-old is not in charge, but we also don't want a miserable 2-year-old. Because let's face it, even if your 2-year-old is totally under your control, which, is a horrible situation, but I guess, I've spoken to people who, they describe their parenting, and they said their parenting attitude was basically there to break them. Like they would break the spirit of a horse, to tame them, to be able to ride them. And this is actually, not, even though we don't, like that was literally the terminology they would use in that household in these cases, but even though, maybe your parents would never dream of saying anything like that about the way that they raised you, but it might not still be a million miles from the truth, right? They may have an attitude of, God, children, if left to run wild, are just, a nightmare. So, you need to kind of break them into being civilized, right? Into socialized. And so we don't want to do that, I would say, to our children. I'm sure you'd agree, Helen. We don't want to break their spirit so that they behave and conform. But we also definitely don't want to do that to ourselves, right? Mm-hmm. And so what we have to realize is that while the chimp part of it's in control is basically kind of terrorizing us and leading us to a situation where we're probably not going to be successful in the world, almost certainly not going to be successful in the world, and we're probably not going to live that long either, because we'll be indulging in all kinds of things that are way more easily available in our culture than they ever were. On the other hand, if the chimp is thoroughly suppressed and thoroughly controlled and thoroughly enslaved, we may as well not be alive, because the chimp part of us is where we get our joy, where we get our fun, where we get our sense of meaning and purpose. And so when I meet people who are on the other side of the, I'm depressed, or, I don't feel very passionate, I don't feel very joyful, I don't feel very motivated to do anything, I don't really feel happy, I don't really feel inspired. This kind of situation, which is very common, by the way, in the world. That's because the chimp has been just, even though it may be in control in a lot of ways, it's also being beaten down. And it's not allowed to express itself freely. So to answer the original question, Helen, when the chimp is kind of, throwing a tantrum maybe, we want to give it safe space to do that and really hear it out. Obviously, we don't want to indulge it. We don't want to kind of, wake up and find that we've kind of smashed up our house, while having a literal tantrum. But we also don't want to just ignore and suppress and break that part of ourselves. We really want to listen to it.
So it's okay to have some fun, but maybe we can tell our chimp, well, let's do something else other than the chocolate cake. What else would you find exciting? What else would you find? You can sort of compromise with your chimp, I guess, like you can with a child.
Exactly.
Yes, it's a really interesting concept.
And the whole children thing, I may have to interview you about this soon, Helen, because I know that this is really a focus for you and that you've really mastered this whole area. But I don't know if you can
say that.
Well, you're in the process of mastery, let's put it that way then. Because, the challenge that we have with children, of course, is that they don't have, most of us were in a situation where, we're beyond our mid-20s, where our prefrontal cortex is fully formed. It's just not in charge, as we say. It's kind of more just commenting and kind of berating itself or whatever, but it's not really kind of making the decisions and the one in control a lot of the time. Well, it's even more difficult for a child, let's say like a 10-year-old, because they don't even have a fully formed human part of themselves, right? Because the prefrontal cortex isn't fully formed until the mid-20s in a human. So it's even more difficult for them. And this is, again, where we need to be very careful with children, and I'm not saying it's easy, but, in terms of if they're not acting like fully responsible, sensible, rational human beings, it's like, well, they literally don't have the capacity to do that yet.
Yeah,
they literally don't have the possibility.
So, Elwyn, I wanted to ask you one last question, and you said there aren't any herbs or anything that you can take to support the neural pathways, but could you support your Shen? Could you support your clarity and the human part, the higher part of your brain, to make it easier to commit to keep yourself clear and commit to making these new pathways to communicating with your chimp?
That's a really great question, Helen. Let me answer two parts of that. First of all, just to clarify, I didn't say there was nothing that could help. I just said there's nothing that's going to help you do it overnight. So it's always going to take time. It's always going to take almost only years to be in a position where you've grown enough of those neural pathways where, the human part of you really can take over whenever it needs to and kind of do some course correction and set you on the right path. However, are there things that will support that process? Absolutely. In terms of growing those new neuronal connections, this is something I happen to have dived into fairly deeply like working with and interviewing neurotherapists who specifically help people to grow those new brain connections really as fast as possible. And so they're absolutely clear that there is something you can do nutritionally to support that process, and that's large amounts of long-chain omega-3 fatty acids, right? So EPA and DHA. And so, and this is really important. Again, this is not a product pitch. This is something that's absolutely essential for that process. So if you're in a position where you are doing all this practice, you're doing the meditation and you're doing the breathing practice, you're doing all this kind of thing, and you're seriously deficient in long-chain omega-3s, like, again, a lot of people are, like the majority of the population, unfortunately, is, then it's going to be a hell of a lot harder to grow those new neuronal connections, right? You'll do it. It'll take much longer, if ever. That's how bad it is. So you need to make sure you have that. So personally, I make sure I have either 6,000 milligrams of krill. I make sure I have at least 6,000 milligrams of pharmaceutical grade fish oil, or 12,000 milligrams of pure algae oil, both of which contain large amounts of EPA and DHA. And I make sure I have that every day, and have done for the last year and a half, something like that, to really assist me in that. And it's been hugely, hugely important. So anyone who's serious about this process, I would really recommend that. I know that is a lot. If you're feeling like it's outside your budget or your range right now, then yes, less is still better than nothing, right? So if you feel like you could really only afford 1,000 milligram a day, no problem. You know, that's still, 1,000 times better than 0 milligrams. But I'm just kind of giving you the optimal amounts there for if you're really committed to this process. So that's really important. Obviously, all the nutrients are important. If you're deficient in anything, then it's going to stop your brain from creating these new neural pathways as well as it could. But that one is especially important, as would be choline, right? And we find choline in eggs. We find choline in lecithin. We find choline a little bit in bee pollen. But choline is generally something that we get from animal foods or soya lecithin. So it's something that all my vegan friends would probably need to pay particular attention to. And it comes under the general category of phospholipids as well. You're doing a bit of research on that. So those are the kind of nutrients, especially for the new brain connections. So it answers that. And then, so that's on the kind of building blocks end of the spectrum. On the helping your body to be more centered in your true self, your human self sense, then absolutely right, Helen. We're talking about Shen herbs. The herb which is probably more relevant to this particular conversation than anything else is polygala. Right?
I love polygala.
Yeah, me too. When I first read about it, it had these wild claims of, it can help all your dreams come true. It can help you to manifest into reality, that which you visualize and imagine, which I thought was, a little bit far-fetched. But, I started taking it every day, and before long, everything that I wanted came into reality. So now I'm not as skeptical about that one. So I really like polygala. Polygala is a really, really great one for growing that will, that capacity to have the front part of the brain be able to give commands, give direction to the back parts of the brain. And in general, all Shen herbs will help you because the main challenge with especially the back part of the brain, really the center as well, with both of them, is that they tend to get overexcited, right? And so, if they're, as I said, you don't want them to be kind of flat either, because then you're kind of walking around like a lifeless zombie. So you definitely don't want that. But assuming that's not the case, we also don't want a situation where we're like on this emotional roller coaster because, oh my God, we're terrified about this. Oh my God, we're freaked out about that. Oh my God, this is such a drama. Oh my God, this is so urgent. Because that keeps us kind of in this animal state. So the Shen herbs are really, really powerful at calming down those centers.
That makes sense for me, Owen, because I've been taking polygala for I think about 1.5 years every day, and then sometimes when I feel like I think I'll just go and do something else, or I won't want to stick to my higher mission in life or whatever, I can literally have a cup of polygala and things start to calm down and my prefrontal cortex takes control of the show again, but not in a sort of aggressive bullying way. It's almost like, it calms down. That chimp part that's maybe having a bit of a paddy. Wow. I didn't quite understand how that worked, but it does work.
Absolutely. And and I'd say the same is true of all the Shen herbs, so reishi is probably the most famous within our community anyway, as being the spiritual herb. And it's really for that reason, I would say. It's, at least on a physical level, it's calming you down. It's calming those parts of you down specifically. And naturally, when the animal parts calm down, that what's, called the spirit or the true self or whatever is able to shine, one of the things I hear a lot in spiritual texts is that the reason why the fairly quiet voice of the true self is not heard is because the much louder voices of the false self are kind of drowning it out, And so we can just quiet down those those loud cries of the false self, and then we can be more and more in tune with our true self, which is kind of like the center of the cyclone, So most of us, I feel like we're in life where we're kind of in the periphery of a cyclone. We're being blown here and there and everywhere and left and right and up and down. And so it's maybe exciting and it's maybe interesting some of the time. Some of the time it's, it's bad. Some of the time it's good. But we're always all over the place. And so what we do as the human part, as the spirit, which correlates actually to the heart. I mean, it's a whole other conversation, but the prefrontal cortex has a connection with the heart, I would say. So when that center of us, which relates to the human part of us, becomes more in control, it's like we're in the center of the cyclone. And we still, perceive the world has got all this craziness going on all around us, but we can stay calm, we can stay centered, we can stay at peace. And, the benefit of that also is we can kind of be a refuge then for everyone else who's still kind of stuck in the cyclone, to give them a little bit of, it's okay kind of message, and maybe give them some support to getting out of the roller coaster as well, and realizing they can kind of calm down and touch base in the center and chill out and relax and know it's all okay.
Oh, that's so amazing. So to summarize, if you want to stay calm and have, I guess sort of both parts of your brain working together, then some very practical things you can do are breathing practice, to meditate, to set yourself some goals, but to do it in a fun, nourishing, nurturing sort of way, and to make sure that you look after your nutrition, especially your long-chain fatty acids, and to maybe try experimenting with some Shen herbs. So that's a whole load of fascinating stuff for you to try and see if it can help move you towards where your higher self or your goals, where you actually want to get to, and to make the journey easier and more pleasurable, which is always a really amazing thing. Have you got anything else you'd like to add, Elwyn?
Just like a final thought, other than all that practical stuff, is next time, especially if you're in a state of upset, just ask, who is doing this? So, for instance, if you're like, oh God, I'm really angry, I'm really resentful about the fact that I can't eat any chips or donuts, or I can't eat anything that's cooked, or I can't eat anything that's got gluten in or whatever, right? So ask yourself, well, who's really upset? You? The true you is annoyed because they can't eat something that's only going to damage them and make them ill anyway? Really? And, I suppose like the true part of me probably isn't that upset about something like that, It's like, who is it? And so, if you dig down, you're probably going to find it's the emotional, part of yourself. It's more the chimp. And by emotional, again, I mean kind of more the reactive emotional part of yourself. It's the chimp part. That's kind of resentful that you can't eat bread with everyone else, or that you can't eat your favorite, unhealthy food or whatever, right? And just start differentiating, rather than taking every I or me that pops into your head for granted. Start asking yourself, who is that? Who is that who's, upset right now? Who is that who's, totally okay with it, right? To try and get to know the different aspects of yourself is really, really important as well.
That's great advice, Elwyn. So thank you once again, Elwyn. That was fascinating, and thank you for listening. And again, if there are any subjects that you would like us to cover in these interviews, then please leave a comment. Let us know what you would like us to address, or if you've got any comments or questions, then please feel free to post underneath, and we'll do our best to address them in future interviews.